Unearth is perhaps the most confusing ability in the Commander format, and mostly in the Commander format because of the other replacement effects that compete with Unearth's own replacement effect, where instead of leaving the battlefield and going somewhere else, the creature or permanent gets exiled. Now this affects me mostly because I create a lot of YouTube shorts explaining combos and how they work, and in one of my most recent shorts for the Brothers War, I went over the combo between Mishra Tamer of Makfawa and Void Maw. Mishra Tamer of Makfawa reads each artifact card in your graveyard has Unearth of 3 mana, which means you can use artifact creatures for this, and Void Maw reads if another creature would be put into a graveyard from play, remove it from the game instead. Now for Unearth, it is an implied replacement effect. It doesn't actually say instead, but it works pretty much the same way as the replacement effect for Void Maw. Now another one I'm briefly going to discuss towards the end of the video is the interaction between Unearth and Exile. That one's a bit easier, so I'm not going to go over that one first. There's an actual comprehensive ruling for it, but the reason why I want to make this video is that this is something that is true, like this is how the interaction works, but it's not written clearly in the comprehensive rules. Because most people, they look at Unearth and they determine that by Unearth's own ruling, Void Maw's replacement effect could never occur. And I understand why a lot of people are confused. I was confused by this at first because we don't really see this happen that often. There are only so many decks in the Commander format that take advantage of Unearth this way. So I went through a thread on MTG Salvation. I think it's a great resource. This is an older thread, but this goes back to when Shards of Alara and a lot of these cards were more relevant. So we get the initial question here. I know flicker effects can be used with Unearth, as Unearth will see the card being exiled and try not to replace it with exile so it can return to the battlefield, which we'll again go over why that's true towards the end of the video. My question is, this is the important part, can Void Maw be used in the same way? Say I unearth my Hellspark Elemental and end phase sacrifice it. My hunch is that both Void Maw and Unearth try to replace going to the graveyard with exiling, and I can choose which applies, and if it's Void Maw, it satisfies Unearth, allowing me to return the creature to my graveyard with Void Maw's activated ability. However, another part of me says that Unearth replaces the leaving play, not the entering the graveyard, and it needs to leave play before it can enter the graveyard, meaning it will never try to hit the yard before being replaced by the Maw. Any idea which it is? We will have another thread here discussing this, and I think it's more important that we just get a solid explanation from multiple people. So the response here, Unearth says, if this tries to go anywhere other than exile, exile it. Void Maw says, if this tries to go to the graveyard, exile it. Since Hellspark is sacrificed, it tries to go to the graveyard, and both effects try to replace that event with exile it. You can choose to apply Void Maws first, then Unearth no longer applies, so it works the way you want it to work. If the Hellspark were exiled by another effect or something tries to move it to your library or your hand instead, Void Maw couldn't replace that event because the Hellspark isn't even trying to go to the graveyard in the first place. What I also would like to add to this, pay attention to the wording of Void Maw. It says if another creature would be put into a graveyard from play. Unearth also has the would wording, would it ever leave the battlefield, you exile it. The action causing it to die would have to take place. That's really it. It replaces the entire event from happening, which is why cards like Blood Artist do not trigger after replacement effects sending creatures to exile instead of the graveyard. To clarify and to help you understand, this is the first thing that people are confused by. They read the leaving the battlefield off of Unearth, and they assume that leaving the battlefield takes some super priority over going to the graveyard. It does not. When you sacrifice a creature to something like Phyrexian Altar, simultaneously two things are going to happen. It is going to leave the battlefield and go to the graveyard. Leaving the battlefield is more of an umbrella phrase because there isn't this magical leaving the battlefield zone that's purely independent of everything else, like getting exiled, going to the graveyard, going back to your hand, going to your library, which is why both of these replacement effects occur. Continuing to a different thread, just to kind of reiterate, if I unearth a creature with Void Maw in play and the creature dies, can I exile it with Void Maw so it avoids the trigger and can be put back into the graveyard? Yes, both Unearth and Void Maw create replacement effects applying to how the creature leaves the battlefield. Since you are the creature's controller, you can choose which ones apply, meaning that you control both of the sources here, the creature that was unearthed and the Void Maw. Note that Unearth does not create a triggered ability exiling the creature, but rather a replacement effect. And what's important to remember here is that replacement effects do not use the stack. It's possible to interact with the ability that a replacement effect could be a part of, but the replacement effect itself is not something you respond to. Now, to make a distinction here without much of a difference to what the original responder was saying, when you unearth a creature, it doesn't return to the graveyard at the end of turn, it is exiled instead, so Void Maw's ability never has a chance to apply. This is referring to the end of turn off of the unearth, where it gets exiled, so you have to sacrifice the creature in question using something else or destroy it during your turn so that it is actually capable of both dying and leaving the battlefield. And then they add at the end, if you want to get real technical, it is a static ability that generates a replacement effect. Okay, so for it to be able to trigger, I need to have the creature die before the end of turn trigger for exiling to happen. Like say another creature's ability sacrificing it, then I can stack the replacement effects, and then they respond again. It's not a triggered ability, it's a static ability generating a replacement effect. The replacement effect will only replace an instance of a creature being sent to the graveyard. An unearthed creature will not be sent to the graveyard at end of turn, it will be exiled, so Void Maw will have no effect on it. You will have to sacrifice it, deal lethal damage to it, or destroy it in some way, and try to send it to the graveyard in order to apply Void Maw's effect. So again, this is important to remember. At the end of turn, for Unearth, the creature is exiled. The combo here that works with Mishra and Void Maw works because you're capable of sacrificing it during your turn. Now, another confusing interaction is Unearth and Blink. The act of exiling the creature using that type of ability after that creature was unearthed from the graveyard. Where this is commonly found in decks is when using Cedrus the Traitor King as your commander and Deadeye Navigator in any way. So you could have Deadeye Navigator come into play, soul bond with an unearthed creature. You could unearth Deadeye Navigator from your graveyard, soul bond with another creature that way, use its ability to blink itself. This actually works, and this is a lot easier to explain because it has a comprehensive ruling for it. If a creature returned to the battlefield with Unearth would leave the battlefield for any reason, it's exiled instead, unless the spell or ability that's causing the creature to leave the battlefield is actually trying to exile it. In that case, it succeeds in exiling it. If it later returns the creature card to the battlefield, as Oblivion Ring or Flicker Wisp might for example, the creature card will return as a new object with no relation to its previous existence. The Unearth effect will no longer apply to it. So the replacement effect in this case is not going to replace something if it's going to happen anyway. Unearth cares about exiling it. If you're exiling it anyway, there's no need to replace it. Again, I want to make this video because I don't really see a lot of explanations for this, so I want to at least put out my own. This is only really scratching the surface when it comes to replacement effects and all the different interactions, and there are way more replacement effects than just these two and anything interacting with exiling creatures instead of sending them to the graveyard. But when it comes to the ultimate confusion in Commander, I don't think there's ever been one that comes quite close to Unearth and how it interacts with other replacement effects. It may be the fault of the wording. I think honestly, leaving the battlefield versus going to the graveyard is the most confusing part about this, because in your mind you have to deprogram yourself from thinking that leaving the battlefield is anything other than adjacent to going to the graveyard. So let me know in the comment section below if this helped you understand any better. Again, that's all I really aim to do with this type of video, is to provide more information on the topic that I myself struggled to find. If you would like to see more videos like these in the future, please subscribe to the channel. Commander Void here signing off. I will see you all next time.